Welcome back to Real Estate Crash Course Podcast. I'm your host, Morgan Cole, and joining me again today is my co-host, Kristen Lopez. Kristen, how are you today?
I am doing fantastic, Morgan. It is great to be back for another episode of the Real Estate Crash Course.
I want to follow up on something that we talked about at the beginning of the last episode, because I've been experimenting a little bit with bionic reading and the Kindle. So you inspired me to start writing notes a little bit more.
Fantastic.
So I have a friend who has an e-ink tablet, which is called a Remarkable 2, and it's amazing, really amazing. Awesome note-taking and synchronization and cut and paste and all kinds of stuff. And I was interested in doing some more reading. We talked about bionic reading. So I found the Kindle Scribe is a really good Kindle. I mean, it's large screen, backlight, nice size, but it also has a stylus, so it's a writing tablet. And I wanted to do, I thought in what I read that I was going to be able to choose the font for bionic reading. No, you cannot do that. What you have to do is take an ebook and download it on your computer and then change it into bionic font and then re-upload it to your e-reader.
That is too many steps for 2023.
Yeah, no, way too many steps. I don't understand why somebody at Kindle wasn't listening to our podcast and was like, aha, we need to do that. But you're listening, right? But anyway, so I figured out that I'm loving taking notes. I'm loving writing things. There's a connection in your brain.
Yeah,
you know
absolutely.
this. You're the one that said it. I am not reading on the Kindle as much as I thought I would.
Sure.
And I've also been taking notes on the e-ink thing so much that I began to become frustrated that it couldn't do a couple of things.
Yeah.
So returned the Kindle and got the Remarkable 2.
And how is that?
It is the undisputed champion of e-ink note-taking.
That's fantastic. And does it sync up with anything else? Does it sync to your drive or?
So it has its own cloud thing that you get a 1-year subscription for free on. Otherwise, it's $3 a month. And it does connect with Dropbox, OneDrive, and maybe another system. I connected OneDrive to it, and you can download things and read them, but it doesn't allow you to save the notes that you write into OneDrive.
Gotcha.
Which I can appreciate, if I needed to read a long contract or PDF or something, that I can read it on the e-ink reader, but I thought when it said OneDrive that I was going to be able to save my notes.
Sure.
But one thing it does is it saves your most recently used email addresses. So there's a couple of people that I regularly take notes with on a meeting and then I email it to them. On the Kindle Scribe, for example, I'd have to type in the email address every time.
Ah, that's very cool.
Yeah, so on the Remarkable, it's oh, here's your recently used email address. And I'm boop, boop, send. And something that's really neat about these is, first of all, you're not worried about paper.
Yeah.
Second of all, the size of the canvas, if you will, the page, you can move left and right. So if you're running off the page, it's no, I'm just going to make this page bigger.
Oh, that's cool.
So and then with the Remarkable, you can take your stylus and you can draw around something and you can copy it and paste it, or you can move a page from one notebook to another notebook. It's way more the things that I wanted to be able to do. You and I would have a conversation and I'd start writing something and I'd no, this needs to be its own notebook.
Right.
With the Scribe, I couldn't do it. With this one, I can do that. So that's pretty awesome.
That is fantastic. So people at Remarkable, if you're listening, we will take a sponsorship for this podcast.
Yes, we definitely will. We just sold some Remarkables for you. So why don't you sponsor us up here?
All right, so let's dive into today's topic, which is cash on cash return, or COC for short. Now, Morgan, can you give us a brief overview of what cash on cash return is all about?
You bet, Kristen. So cash on cash measures the performance of the cash that you have invested into a property relative to the cash that the property generates on an annual basis. And The reason I'm using the words cash and the reason cash on cash is because this is really cash in and cash out.
Okay.
The big difference compared to cap rate, which we learned about in the previous episode, is that cash on cash is about the money you put in. Cap rate is about the value of the property. And generally speaking, I mean, there's got to be a statistic out there somewhere, but most people, let's just say, finance their properties.
Sure.
Most people don't pay cash. A cap rate does not tell you how much money you make after financing. A cash on cash return takes into consideration all of your operating expenses and the mortgage payment and the cash you're left with at the end of the year compared to the money you had to invest in the property after you put your down payment down.
Okay. So that is very clarifying. So cash on cash return is about understanding the efficiency of the cash that we have invested into our real estate.
That's a great way of putting it. So yes, if it's less efficient, we would be earning a smaller return on our money. If it's more efficient, we would be receiving cash out of the investment at a greater level of efficiency.
Sure. So before we dive into calculations on cash and how we get there, I want to stay a little bit higher level. And so, is it possible to have a negative cash on cash return? And if we do, does that necessarily mean that it is not a good investment?
Yes. Briefly, yes and no. Yes, you can. No, it is not necessarily a bad investment. So now let me explain that. Let's say that a property generated $10,000 of NOI, net operating income, and it had a $15,000 loan payment annually.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just say annually. So we have $5,000 negative
Sure.
cash flow. And let's say that we invested $50,000 in the property. So that would be a negative 10% cash on cash return. That'd be negative 5,000 divided by $50,000 would be negative 10%. So you might just say on its face, like, hey, that's terrible. Why would you buy that if you're going to lose money?
Sure.
Well, okay, but you might look at it and say, I mean, every part of these metrics that we're talking about is part of a bigger picture. Okay, so perhaps we've already graduated both in our knowledge path here and also in evaluating a property that it passes the muster of cap rate. Okay, so we've looked at this property and it has a 8% cap rate, and I'm okay with that.
Right.
And we all are now experts in cap rate because we listened to the last episode. So now we're moving on to cash on cash, but now we're figuring out it's a negative 5% cash on cash. Well, I would maybe buy it if I knew that next year there was going to be a rental increase that was going to pick it up to where it was going to break even. Or perhaps, and this is more of an internal rate of return thing that we'll discuss more in the next episode, but perhaps I'm expecting $100,000 of appreciation in the next 3 years. Well, Kristen, if I said to you, Kristen, you are going to have to give up $5,000 a year, but in 3 years when you sell it, you're going to make $100,000.
I'm giving you $5,000.
You're in all day, every day,
every
right?
day.
Okay, so good investment?
Yes.
Okay, so it's not always black and white.
Sure.
But if we go to the other side of that, I mean, that's an example that is real. I mean, that's a real thing that people do. It's also more about like, okay, well, this property generates a 0.5% cash on cash, and this other one generates a 10. So now you got to figure out,
Sure.
Is there something about that 0.5? Like, why would I buy that?
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's also going to make $100,000, but it's not guaranteed. Maybe the one that generates the 10% cash on cash return, maybe that's practically guaranteed, but we also know with a reasonable degree of certainty there's not going to be measurable appreciation. So we might say, yeah, I'll take it, I'll buy it, but the only way I'm going to buy it is if it has a higher cash on cash return to compensate me for the lack of expected appreciation.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. So, as we're diving into this, it really is just coming very clear. As we talked about cap rate last episode, and we're talking about cash on cash this episode, it really is about what is most important to the individual investor as far as what their long-term goals are of how they want to measure cap rate and cash on cash. Now, whenever you were giving us that last answer, you very just offhandedly threw out the formula for how you calculate the cash on cash return, which seemed very straightforward. Could you dive more into how you calculate the cash on cash return?
Yeah. Okay. Sure. I did the negative 5,000 divided by 50,000. So let me explain
Which
that.
seemed very easy to do.
Yeah, it's relatively easy math. It's funny when I do math with my son who's 8. I have to stop and like actually explain. Like we do negative numbers and things like that, and I have to try to explain it to him. So the formula for calculating cash on cash return is that you take first you need to know two things.
Sure.
You need to know what your before tax annual cash flow is. So that's going to be your NOI, net operating income, minus your debt service, your mortgage payment. So let's just say we had $15,000 of NOI. Let's say we had a $10,000 mortgage payment. We have $5,000 of cash flow before we pay our income tax. And we're going to do all of these metrics before tax. And then what we also need to know is how much cash we put in. So in this case, let's say that we bought a property for $200,000. We got a $150,000 loan. And with the closing costs and everything, all that we wrote a check for at the title company was $50,000. So I've got $50K in, and it's paying me $50,000 in the first year. I take $5,000 of before tax cash flow, divide it by my $50,000 cash that I put in, and I get a 10% cash on cash return.
Interesting. Okay, so you said down payment there and everything that we're putting in whenever we're purchasing the property. Would we also want to calculate in if we needed to put any rehab into the property? So whenever we purchased it, let's say that it needed some work. It needed new floors. It needed a roof. It needed a new HVAC system. And let's say that costs an additional $30,000. Would we now change that to add our $50,000 down payment plus our $30,000 that we had in to now we're looking at $80,000 investment?
I would say that probably yes, assuming that wasn't part of the loan.
Sure.
Then absolutely yes. And so let's go down that path again. Let me elaborate on my example. So let me say that we did invest the 50, and then as you mentioned, we decided to put the 30 into it. So at this point, what I have is I've got $80,000 invested in the property, but it's still generating that $5,000 of cash. So I'm going to take 5,000 and I'm going to divide that by 80,000, and what I get now is a 6.25% cash on cash.
Okay.
Lowered it from 10 to 6.25. There is one more thing that you could consider that is real. I mean, it is real. You have to consider it. Is sometimes people call like their stabilization costs,
Sure.
Or any other money that you took from your ordinary bank account or out of your possession and you parked it into an investment to get the investment off the ground. Could have even just been, hey, I moved working capital out of my account and into my property manager's trust account or something like that. So let's just say that you took another $5,000 because you had 2 months of vacancy and you also had to give like $1,000 repair reserve or something like that. So in that case, we would have $85,000 invested.
Okay.
So we could take $5,000 of annual cash flow and divide it by $85,000, and we'd now be at 5.88, 5.9% cash on cash return.
Okay. So sticking here down this formula that we're looking at, whenever we're calculating cash on cash, is that only in the first year of us owning the property? Or if we go 7 years down the line and now things need to be fixed within the property, are we now doing a recalculation of cash on cash? Is this a metric that changes every single time we add money out of pocket into our property?
Yes. And generally speaking, people don't add money to an investment that often.
Sure.
But yes, if you are increasing your basis of your investment amount, rather, then yes, you would have a new investment amount that you would need to be calculating the cash output on. And also, yes, you calculate it every year. So let's say in the first year, I mean, let's run with 85. I mean, we've already established that.
Yeah.
So now we got 85,000 in the first that we've invested, and in the first year we got our $5,000, and we said that was a 5.88% cash on cash return. Let's say in year 2, we did a rental increase of $100 a month. So instead of our net being $5,000, our net is now $3,800. We did $1,200. Oh, excuse me, $6,200. I forgot we're not negative anymore. I was still trying to get away from the negative 5,000. So let's say now we're making $6,200. Okay, so I'm going to do $6,200 divided by 85,000, and I'm at a 7.3% cash on cash.
Okay.
And let's do that one more time. We're aggressively doing the rental increases at $100, and let's go to $7,400. So I'm going to go $7,400. Divided by the $85,000 investment, I've got us up to an 8.7 now. Okay, we're in year 3 where we've done 2 $100 increases, and we are absolutely going to track this every year.
Sure.
That's a really cool thing about cash on cash, is because as you're modeling in your expected rental increases, but your investment stays the same, you'll see the cash on cash lift off.
Okay.
We just went from 5.8 to 6.9 to 8.7 cash on cash return. Now, but let's say that we had a major capital expenditure and I had to spend $15,000. I don't know, dealer's choice. I mean, roof, air conditioner, all of the above.
Water leak.
There you go. So we now have, I mean, you can do this in your head now, our $85,000 has now gone to $100,000. So we have the $7,400 of cash out. Cash flow in that year, that's now gone from an 8% return. Now we're at a 7.4% return.
Gotcha. Okay.
So you could easily move these numbers around, and every single year your cash on cash return could change and your amount of cash invested could change.
Okay. And so in this example, the cash on cash return is 7.8%. That means that for every dollar that you've invested, you're earning about 7.8 cents of in cash flow each year?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. To be honest, that's a good way of expressing it. It's easier for my brain to do it in dollars. So let's just say that if you did $1,000 investment and you had a 10% return, then you'd be getting back $100.
Gotcha.
Because 10% of 1,000 or 10% of 100 would be $10. Maybe we could go with that. So for every $100 invested, you're getting the percentage back in dollars. But yeah, it is cash in versus cash out. And it does, it doesn't take into consideration appreciation or the loan principal balance going down, the amortization of the loan, but you don't realize those things until you sell it.
Sure.
So while you're operating the property, cash on cash return will move with the property, and as time goes on and as the situation changes, your cash on cash return will change.
Okay. And so that's where I'd like for us to jump to. What are some of the key factors that can affect our cash on cash return?
So let's think about this for a second. Your rental income is going to be the most significant part of your income piece. In many cases, it's the only income that a property has, but you might have ancillary income such as laundry facilities or utility income or garbage or pet income or something like that. So let's just say the biggest thing that could affect it would be rental income, and then the things that affect rental income are going to be vacancy and sometimes they call it loss to lease or credit. I mean, not loss to lease. Excuse me. That's totally different. Credit losses. Sure. So it could be, hey, I leased out to somebody and we made a bad move and this person didn't pay us. So the things that could affect it would be the amount of income and the stability of the income, and then the other part would be another part would be operating expenses. So if we were spending too much money on maintenance, that's going to tear into our cash on cash return. Now, those are things that can be those are things that are dynamic, right? Your rental income is more than likely going to be different every single year.
Sure.
Some years more, some years less. And your operating expenses are going to be different every single year. The decision that you make when you purchase the property, which is, unless you do a refinance, is not going to change, is the amount of cash you invested and your loan payment amount. I take that back. You could have some sort of a variable loan.
Sure.
But so it would be your loan payment and your loan amount. So if you invest, if you get a larger loan, then you have less cash invested, and you theoretically are going to have a higher cash on cash return. So let's say that $85,000, well, the $100,000. Let's just drop that back down.
Round numbers. We're back to round numbers.
So let's take our $100,000, but let's say that we we borrowed the money for the predicted capital expenditure. You put 30K of rehab into this property, remember?
Sure.
And you had a $15,000 capital expenditure, but let's say that we predicted those items and we decided to borrow that. So now we're back to only investing $50,000 in the property. Well, that's great, because if we still earn our $7,400 and we divide that by $50,000, now we're at a 14.8% return.
Wow.
But we are not going to get $7,400 anymore,
Right.
because we got a loan that was $50,000 more.
Now we have a higher mortgage.
And now we have a higher mortgage. That's exactly right. So now maybe we have a $1,000. So $1,000 divided by $50,000 is a 0.2 or a 2% cash on cash return.
Okay.
So the factors that will affect it are your dynamics of your variability of your rental income and your operating expenses, and then when you buy it, your decision of how much of a loan you want to get and what the corresponding loan payment's going to be.
So I want to ask you your personal opinion here.
Okay.
And so whenever you are looking to purchase a property, do you like to see a higher cash on cash? Do you look for a lower cash on cash? Do you like to come more out of pocket to make sure that we can cash flow quicker? Like, just on a general basis, what do you look for whenever it comes to cash on cash?
Right now, my answer to that question is going to be I want a higher cash on cash, because I would rather have cash flow.
Okay.
Right now, today, I can tell you what I would be processing would be, we're in a little bit of an uncertain time with property values where we've had a huge run up right now. So future people listening to this, it is April of 2023. Okay. If you're listening to this in 2025, I don't know what's going on, but it is currently April of 2023. In our market, we experienced a huge run up.
And that's the Woodlands.
In the Woodlands, Texas, north of Houston. I don't know what the real percentage is, but I mean, in 2 years' time, from 2020 through 2022, I think property values went up 20% or something like that.
That's crazy.
Really crazy. Really crazy. Maybe not quite that high everywhere, but they went up a lot. Now, they haven't fallen 20%, but they've eased off a little bit. And you also have higher interest rates. So what's on my mind? What's on my mind is I don't want to buy a property banking on appreciation.
Sure.
They just went up a ton. I can't assume they're going to go up more. So we need to find a property that makes me, the real estate investor, happy with cash flow, because I'm not banking on appreciation in the near term. Secondly, interest rates are high, so cash flow is precious right now. So let's make sure we can buy a property that has actually got a measurable amount of cash flow that's going to be able to pay this higher interest rate that's going to be able to give me a cash on cash return.
Sure.
So, me, the investor, right now, I'm looking for a higher cash on cash return. I will answer former me. I bought some houses in this area back in 2016, and I accepted a 0 to negative cash on cash return, banking on appreciation. And at that point, we were not on the heels of a huge run up. There was no reason to be standing there believing anything other than that the property values would be more in the future than they are in the near future. Not everywhere, but generally speaking, time will cause every piece of real estate to become worth more money.
Sure.
Generally speaking. But you got to think, hey, what's going to happen in the next 3 years? What's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years? Well, what happened in the 3 to 5 years prior to this? Did we have a 20% run up? Well, let's not assume we're going to have another 20% run up. So, yeah, there's your answer on what I'll be looking for right now.
That's very, very insightful, especially given the market, because I always have looked at real estate and evaluated it forward thinking. And until this moment, I hadn't realized how important it is to also be looking at the historical trends of what we have just experienced. Because not just here in the Woodlands, but also in San Antonio, we're constantly appreciating as well in value. I mean, at one point we were up to like 16%, and
unreal.
Nation average is, what is the nation average of appreciation?
I've
heard like 6, 4, I don't know, somewhere
yeah,
around there.
I was going to say 7 in the most recent couple of years. I wish that I could just spout that out, but it changes. It's right now. It changes a lot. But yeah, I would say over the last few years, the national average is probably about 7.
Yeah.
And yeah, we both have experienced double-digit
Absolutely.
appreciation in our markets.
100%. So looking backwards is just as important as looking forward. And so, again, just really appreciating the 360-degree view that we have to look at investing in a property at all metrics and really figuring out to us as the investor, what is the metric that means the most to me and where is my portfolio looking to grow?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's hitting on those metrics that are important to you. Is really what it is. And that's what this, we want to be sure that our listeners have a good foundation to understand the significance of each metric so they can figure out which one or two of them are the most important to themselves.
Absolutely. And that is why we're doing our series, right?
Yep.
Last episode, we went over cap rate. And this episode, we were going over cash on cash. And Morgan, what are we going to be talking about in our next episode?
Next episode is going to be internal rate of return, or IRR. And I know that I mentioned that the cash on cash is while the property's operating. Because while the property's operating, we don't realize appreciation or the loan amortizing. Internal rate of return takes into consideration the life cycle of the entire investment. Sure. So it's the money that we put as a down payment. It's the money that we receive every year for the, say, 10 years that we own the property. And then it's the money that we walk away with at the closing, and how those all come together into one number that essentially tells us what the annualized return was on the entire investment. And that's the most complicated one. And it's but it's something that we need to go over and be sure that someone can identify. Somebody might say, hey, I'm not selling this property. I don't care about the future. Nothing is guaranteed. IRR doesn't matter to me. Fine, then let's talk about cap rate, cash on cash. Yep. Another person might say, I have a high level of income. I need a place to put the income. Cash on cash doesn't really matter. I just want to know that my wealth is growing. Yep. IRR, here we come.
Absolutely. Well, I am looking forward to our next episode, Morgan. I think that it is going to be one that's going to give us a lot of insight, again, in just inspiring us investors as to which metric matters most to us and for our portfolio. So thank you so much, Morgan, for running us through our cash on cash return today. It was very insightful, very helpful for all of us.
You bet, Kristen. I really appreciate you having good questions and getting this information out there for us, because I enjoy talking about it, and it's nice to be able to have these conversations and get this info into our listeners' hands.
Absolutely. Well, we will talk to you next time.
Okay. Bye-bye.